All right. I mean, in the meantime, we can talk about the moo thing.
The what thing?
Moo. MU. Moo.
Moo. Yeah. Did you read the lengthy thread I had with Mike Antoine about that?
I tried. I got through. You know.
It was very interesting, actually.
Yeah.
I think he convinced me of that it's still relevant, because when I first thought about the it depends option, for me it was like, okay, because I always knew like, yeah, okay, there's other options, and then moo was one early suggestion of that, but then I figured out the it depends one, which is much more an effective way of dealing with that. But yeah, there's still also a moo.
Like my it depends is different. I think what I call unresolvable is different from, I think, what he was saying of it depends, because his it depends, as I understood it, is like, well, it depends on your interpretation of the claim. Depends on what you mean by something. Was his version of it?
I think his version and mine are the same, probably the same as yours saying, but there's different ways of making that operational, like designing a system that supports that, right? And that's
well, I don't know, but I want to understand what his version was.
It's about resolving ambiguity. Like if ambiguity. You have,
so mine's not about resolving ambiguity.
Okay, can you clarify?
Yeah, it's what I've mentioned before about the general to specific scale.
But isn't that resolving ambiguity?
No, ambiguity is about not knowing what is meant, right? Whereas general means just being a case too general to say one way or the other.
I think that's what I call ambiguity right now. So then it's
it's two kinds of ambiguity. To me, ambiguity is multiple interpretation.
Okay. Do you remember that we, in another thread, we talked about the difference between homonyms and this? Like, I think what you're arguing right now is, and that is different. But
no, not homonyms. Homonyms is an extreme version, right? But maybe the case of feminism is a better example, where it depends on what you mean by feminism.
Exactly.
Right?
It depends.
Not a homonym in the same. I guess it's a homonym. It's not a homonym in the Paris sense. It's a homonym in the sense of subtle variations.
Exactly, but you just said yourself, it depends on, and that's the depends case. It is generic to specific.
But that's not general to specific to me. That is not general to specific. To me, general to specific is immigration, illegal immigration in the United States, illegal immigration in Texas, illegal immigration in Texas in the 1950s, and so on. And that's general to specific.
But
and it's not about.
I'm not certain. I hear you, because in that case it's clear what is more specific. But I mean,
right?
How is it that much different from the feminism case? Hi, Mike Antoine. We're talking about the it depends case. So we're trying to pick up on the Slack thread we had about moo and about it depends and about homonyms and about that whole thing, if you remember.
Right.
And we're trying to figure out whether the it depends we're referring there to in that thread is the same or different than what Timothy is thinking of.
Right. So I did the meeting at 10. I think I did say I would make it an hour earlier in the Hangouts in the Hangouts group. Maybe I forgot, or maybe I didn't. Sorry about the confusion.
You might have mentioned it. You should have called us when you started, because then we would have.
Well, I wouldn't have had time then, so that's a bit of luck on my side. But I was mostly, I thought it was now because the announcement said it was now. The calendar, the
oh God, yeah, I should have revised the calendar event. Sorry, I'm juggling my. Okay, remember I don't have a computer, so juggling things is a bit more difficult.
Yeah.
I've borrowed my wife's computer, and that's how I could do the thing in the first place. So it's been a bit of a mess. in other words. And right now, what I'm doing is clearing the space so she can get her computer back, which is urgent because she's giving a class now. So divided attention, apologies. But I'll listen to what you have to say and I'll post the recording of my thing as soon as I can.
Okay. All right. So let me put it a different way. There's right, ambiguity, like I've said, is like interpretation of some of your definitions, right? That's how I use the term ambiguity. Whereas general to specific, like the first of all, the immigration case. It's not that somebody said immigration and somebody read it as immigration in Texas, illegal immigration in Texas in the 1950s, right? That's not an interpretation. That is, you're studying different pieces
No, but
of a larger phenomenon, right?
Isn't it more general in the sense that it's immigration everywhere? Or I mean, that's what I've been arguing for. If it's not defined, it's the unification of all the possible interpretations. So yes, it will include that, but it will also include immigration.
I don't consider those interpretations. I don't consider those interpretations.
No, but generic.
They're all expressions. Like each one of those fits under the same definition of immigration, right?
Okay.
It's not that you're talking about different definitions of immigration here. They're all, it's like we say, this street is in Paris, that street is in Paris, that street is in Paris. Oh, there's a street that, depending on your definition of Paris, it is or it isn't. These are all examples of immigration, but each one can be debated separately as to whether or not it's good or bad, right? And so that's the sliding scale of general to specific, right? And in that case, the example I go to with it depends for me is one I pulled out of Tialo once, which was something like stolen, hacked data leaks should not be published by newspapers, something like that, right? And that's the debate. And there are arguments that apply to that on a broad scale, right? Like they should not because they were retrieved illegally, or they should not because whatever. But it turns out actually how do I say this? Like each example of a data breach and whether or not it should be published is a series of criteria.
Just about.
So,
What's the time?
The data leaks should not. When you make a claim, data breaches should not be published, right? The arguments are actually if. I said, they shouldn't be published if there is secret information that could harm people.
Mm-hmm.
They should not be published if maybe they were retrieved illegally and would break laws too. They should not, but they should be published if the public need to know outweighs the protected secrets, right? Mm-hmm. The importance of protecting secrets. So this is my it depends that I was talking about, where I consider a claim to be unresolvable because really you answer it with, well.
So, but I think that's the same use case we have. I guess the question then is, why don't you think the same process can be used in what you don't call it depends, and what you would call, if you can give an example. Because on this way aligned, right? This is what we. I think what I'm saying is, for me, all of these cases are it depends. So this is indeed definitely an it depends case. So can you tell of some way that's not the case?
I haven't said that it can't follow the same process. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I see it as a different version of my concern. My concern was what I called unresolvable claims are ones that, it depends because of these criteria, right? Mm-hmm. I would want to know these data points before I make a
But
decision.
isn't, so the thing that I'm stating is that if it depends, then it probably means that you're going from a more general claim to a more specific claim on which it depends. And you have several more specific claims. Okay, so
Sure.
that's the process. So can you give an example now of something that's not it depends, and we can later see whether or not the same process can be followed and what that means.
Something that's not in it
It's
depends.
working.
Like,
Yeah, because you said before you mentioned that's not it depends to me. So can you give an example of the
I didn't say it's not an it depends. I was saying I don't consider that ambiguity. I think I was saying that
Oh, you
general
don't
specific
consider
is
this
different
example
meaning than
ambiguity?
I don't consider it ambiguity. I
Okay.
consider it, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's important to align on terminology, because I've always called stuff like this ambiguity.
Yeah,
But,
and I'd
to
like
call
to
it an
separate
independence
general
case
to
might
specific.
to be called it a general to specific or independence case might be. I mean, I'm on board with that. We don't have to agree on. We agree on the process, so that's great.
Yeah, yeah.
The-
I think so. I mean, I would have to think about it more, but it's so far I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it makes sense to call it ambiguity only in the cases where the the distinction I make between homonymy and nuance, right? Does the general case make sense on its own?
Yes.
Would it make sense to mean either? And then it's ambiguity. If you can, if people necessarily mean one or the other, then that's more of a specific. It's a different case.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense to label them differently. I'm not a native speaker, so maybe my interpretation of ambiguity was always wrong. But for me, it always covered the nuance of general to specific as well. But yeah, so that's a good point. I think we need to differentiate to be clear what we're talking about.
Yeah, I don't think it's your language skills that issue. It's more like over time, you know, outside of our definitions process, I've come to stick with ambiguity is what I refer to in terms of like differences of interpretation as opposed to
but that's a problem, because if you define it as differences in interpretation, then the it depends case still applies, because I mean,
no, it depends still applies, right? I think it depends.
No, I mean, you could say, oh well, I interpret it as because of the context with I live in a certain place, so I interpret it as immigration in this country. Someone else interpret it as in another country. It still applies,
yeah,
right?
And yet, no, but the difference is when somebody makes an argument, they could say like studies over here showed this, and studies over there showed that. Even though the person may have read it and interpreted it differently, you can go to the definition and say, oh, no, I just read the definition wrong. I see that this argument matches the definition and my stuff matches the definition. So I was just reading the definition wrong. Ambiguity to me is there is a disagreement in terms of whether or not something matches a definition.
Yeah, but what if there is no definition, which is essentially the starting point?
But it's the starting point is ambiguous. Absolutely, it's going to be ambiguous.
But that's interesting, because if the starting point is ambiguous, you're more or less agreeing with my definition of ambiguity.
No.
But okay, I always said like ambiguity is recursive in a way, because sure you can define something, but then how do you interpret the definition?
Ambiguity never ends. Yeah, ambiguity never ends. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not too clear where you want to draw the line then, and whether it matters. I mean, I like the distinction that Marc-Antoine introduced of the homonyms and the are they meaningful to? Yeah, are they meaningful as a generic whole unification? Is it? I think that's much more operational, meaningful to talk about it in that sense. And if you want to restrict that as ambiguous, I'm fine with that.
I mean, I see a clear distinction in my head, and I'm not sure how to communicate the difference. But I think it's starting to become clearer with the work we've done on definition. Like it's totally revolutionized my understanding of how definition should be modeled, and I see so many extra uses in this. and one of them is, I think it becomes clear the difference between ambiguity and general to specific, which is this. And I in fact, I started kind of throwing out ideas quickly into a Medium post. So hopefully within, you know, a couple of weeks, I'll have a Medium post that goes over some of the things we're talking about for definition.
Cool.
But and I need to get an understanding of some of the terms that Marc-Antoine has used, because there are the definitional claims and non-definitional claims, and I wanted to get a better understanding of, you know, what is the definition of each of these elements in a definition before I start using the language here to explain the difference in my mind between ambiguity and general to specific. But like when we in our definition process, right, we have the sentences that describe or that provide the definition, and then we have the examples and the counterexamples and the edge cases, right? And this is, you know, at first I was like, well, we should use our actual definition process rather than whatever's here. But the more and more I look at it, the more I see like the actual modeling in the system should in some way, it should be similar to this in a lot of ways, right? So, but what do you call, damn it,
Well
what do you
done,
call
Stephen.
the sentences, the statements that create the definition? What do you call those?
That's a question for Marc-Antoine, I think.
Yes. I'll let you take that phone. Yeah, that was what I was presenting an hour ago.
We can also reconvene after we've watched, right? I mean,
yeah, I'm waiting for, I think I'll have to have my computer, which should be back today, to get the video and put it online and yada yada. I'm not doing that on my iPad. But let me try to go fast. What's a concept definition, right? I mean, I think that the most important unit of definition for me is what I call the distinction. I'm saying the distinction says here are two or even more concepts, and for each concept, here's a claim that's uniquely true of this concept with respect to the others. And there may be
a distinguishing claim, you called it, yeah.
Distinguishing claim. And there may be a super a set of claims that are true of all of them. And for example, if is there an abstract superclass, that meaningful abstract superclass, that would be an example.
Yeah, I think set theory is working for.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So if we think of distinction as here's what's common, here's what's different, right? And make that into a little package, it has a lot of what we need. And what is good is that the superclass will itself have its distinguishing terms upwards. Now, what this is missing with respect to Stephen's definition frame or schema, which is excellent, I agree, is all the notion of examples and especially the fringe examples. And that's brilliant for concept in progress, right? You want to have the notion, these are the edges of the concept. This is out, this is in. But I think that
One second. You can keep talking. I'm listening.
Yeah. Speaking about instances, should they be part of the definition? On one hand, yes, because they improve the definition's understanding.
Okay.
On the other hand, no, in the sense of canonicality. There's arbitrarily many examples, and we don't want them to change the canonicality of the definition. So they add to the definition, but I don't think they are the definition.
Yeah, agreed. And actually, I wanted to bring this up but it was outside of the glossary meeting. So, but the definition Jonathan introduced includes an example.
Okay.
I'm like, maybe we should move this to the examples instead of introducing it into the definition.
I missed that. What adds to the definition but isn't the definition?
The examples, because you don't. The examples vary too much potentially in terms of canonicality. So if we want to compute what is the canonical signature of the definition, we don't want to include the examples because there's too much variation.
I think the examples, the examples kind of they're an effort to find the distinguishing claims.
Yeah. And I'm all for having frames and schemes that include examples and saying, a curated definition, which is not the same as the canonical definition, should include those examples and have kind of two different definition of definition, like the canonical definition with just the quote unquote the rules, that is the distinguishing claims, and another one which would be the a kind of curated definition, which would include selected examples.
But actually, I see it differently in the canonical debate, which is, and this is where I need some more of the right terms. But when you say an example, like I would see it being, this is an example of that definition. That's a claim, and it's going to be debatable.
Yep.
Right. So it's already connected. You're not including it anywhere. It's already connected through the reference as part of the claim that is then debated. And I think in the places where the debate is there's no consensus, right? It's evenly divided, or it's divided between different sides of whether or not it really matches the definition, is where you're having edge cases. That's where you find edge cases. It's like some people, that's ambiguity, right? That's where you're highlighting ambiguity. Go ahead.
I see what you're saying, and I agree. The example is debatable, and should be debated. On the other hand, there is a distinction in my mind, and I'm sure in yours, about the examples which are kind of foundational to the definition, or made us think of the definition, versus the ones that are edge cases, and is this really a good example or not?
So you're saying that they're non-debatable. There are non-debatable examples that are assumptions made about the definition.
Yeah, what I called a definitional claim is a claim that you could say, if this happens to be false, I'll call it something else, right? And I think and I think the same could be true of definitional examples that way. You could imagine, if this example is not part of this category, I want another name for the category, or I'll, I have. It's not. We're not thinking of the same category. There's a misunderstanding of what the category is about. Now, as I said,
which is ambiguity. That's what I'm saying. Is when there's debate, it's ambiguity, right? Yeah. And so I don't know if you need like definitional claims by that, or definitional examples, maybe the way. But what I was thinking is a definitional claim are the statements that you put into the definition, which is like, Paris is a city. It is located in France. These are claims that are assumptions, are not debatable. What they're doing is drawing out the boundaries of this concept, or this definition, right? Each one is a constraint essentially on that concept.
And the question is, are all definitional claims, do they all fit in my little distinction schema? Are they distinguishing claims in the way I'm saying? Well, distinguishing or superclass, right? Of course. Paris is a city, for example, is not distinguishing it from other city. It's distinguishing it from non-cities, so it's a higher order distinguishing claim. And Paris is in France is distinguishing it from Paris, Texas, so it's a distinguishing claim. Now, are there non-distinguishing definitional claims? I don't think so, but that's, I'm not sure about that claim.
Non-distinguishing definitional claims, which means, but yeah, I guess in every case is distinguishing it from what? I think what you're
Yes.
calling distinguishing claims there, it's not distinguishing explicitly one thing from another, right? It's not like I'm
Yes.
distinguishing this definition from that thing. I'm creating a constraint on the meaning of
No, that's it. No, that's exactly what I'm saying. It is distinguishing one. What I call distinguishing claim is distinguishing one claim for another. I'm saying Paris is disjoint from other cities in that XYZ. It is the capital of France, or at least as of this date. It is.
Right, but I'm saying you're not distinguishing it specifically from Paris, Texas. You're distinguishing it from anything else that might share the other distinguishing claim, right?
Correct.
It's a
correct.
city, and now what you've created is, yeah.
Yeah, I may distinguish it from Paris, Texas, or not. You're right. It needn't be individual, an instance distinction. It may instance distinction versus instance class. But I am my distinction schema. On the other hand, I'm a bit unsure that, how should I put it? Either you're distinguishing from a specific instances, so you're partitioning your superclass, or you're distinguishing it from its complement, saying from all other instances of the superclass.
Right. Yeah.
And I think this is it. I think you're either partitioning or doing a complement. But I mean, I'm not sure. This is an intuition I'm pursuing, but I cannot think of exceptions.
Yeah, I mean, there may be distinguishing claims that are redundant, right?
Yeah.
Like you could say Paris is a city with, Paris has over 100,000 residents. And within the definition of city is that it's any urban, whatever, with more than 100,000 or something, right? So there may be redundant distinguishing claims.
Right. Well, for some of the, as I said, the point of superclass claim, making the superclass part of the distinction, because what am I distinguishing from, right? I'm distinguishing from other cities. So here, when I'm saying it's a city, this is not the distinguishing claim, this is a superclass claim. And then there's distinguishing claims that exist at the city level. City is different from town because blah, blah, blah. So the more than 100,000 would migrate up to the superclass. It's not that it's redundant, it's that its proper level is in the superclass. And there may be many superclasses, it may be a lattice.
Yeah, that's a problem because you could one of the definitional claims could be is longitude and latitude, and then you could be having a definition of Paris from a specific time frame before it had 100,000.
Exactly, and I was going to say the more than 100,000 inhabitants is probably an empirical claim. Rather than, because if there's an epidemic and 99% of the population dies, it's still Paris.
Yeah, and it's also part of the reason why you don't want. Right? It's also part of the reason why you don't want that much specificity. I mean, there is, you want to stay generic where possible, because otherwise, indeed, you're going to have overlapping.
Generic is needed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, rather specific is needed and not anymore. But so more or less, like the text we're writing into the definition are what you would call definitional claims. Is that more or less accurate?
Claims.
Distinguishing claims. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Distinguishing claims.
And what are definitional claims?
I'm claiming it's the same. I'm not sure it's well defined, and I'm saying it might be equivalent. I'm not sure that there's such a thing as a definitional claim.
Maybe a definitional claim is the union of all those distinguishing claims.
That's what I'm claiming. Yes.
Okay, yeah. I can understand why you would call it like that.
Okay.
But it's a distinct claim. Like we
Right.
have an intuitive notion of definition claim that is anything that fits in the definition. And I'm saying all of those I can think of happen to be distinguishing claim. I think that's a universal, but
So and then you have, wait, what are the examples? Because you have then examples, right? Where Paris maybe isn't the right example for this kind of thing. Like, well, you have an example that is, Rue whatever street is in Paris, right? And, maybe that street was only created after a certain time, or maybe that street was on the periphery and was only incorporated into the city of Paris after a certain time. And so that sentence there, that claim or whatever, that example is, what do we call it? A distinguishing example, or it's an example that highlights the difference of one definition over another.
Isn't it just, wouldn't an example be a claim that uses the definitional claim?
It's a claim,
and you say, I believe this example is true. Isn't that what an example is essentially?
Okay, that's interesting.
I guess, yeah, it's something is or matches this definition, right? And so this definition is always part of the claim.
My intuition of example is that when you're speaking of examples, you're speaking of the class instance relationship implicitly. And I'm not sure that this street is or isn't part of Paris fits the class instance schema. It fits the fact that Paris shifted definitions, and so you have a claim that is varying in time for whatever reasons. But I don't think it's what I would call an example. It's a boundary claim, because it's sometimes true, sometimes not. I'm not sure I have a name for it, but let me call it boundary claim for now. But I want to distinguish the notion of example. For me, an example is we have a class, we have an instance of the, we claim.
Oh, right, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you wouldn't say that street is in Paris is an example of Paris, right? Obviously, it's a street, it's not the city Paris.
Yeah,
so
it could be an example of streets in Paris. We can define the class of streets in Paris and say this street is an example of.
That's maybe better phrase as a test, definitional test or something along those lines, and then
an example.
No, but
yeah.
No, but you have like if you're talking about a definition of Paris, right?
Yep.
Then there is only one example,
you can
Paris.
Easily do. No. Yeah, no, it's not an example. That's what I'm saying. It's not an example. We're talking about Paris, and it becomes clear that we're thinking of different Parises, right? And I can say, well, I know that street something 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 is in Paris, and you disagree, and then it's clear. I brought that up specifically to highlight our difference in understanding of the word.
Which is part of the process, indeed. So the question is, I understand the distinction you make, Martin, between examples and what I would call test cases or whatever. But it sounds like what you want, what we're doing with the glossary process is maybe not examples then, but more like test claims or test cases. Or
I think a lot of them are actually examples.
Yeah, but in the cases where they can be examples, but I think Paris indeed is a nice example of something that's hard to give examples for. It's much more
because it's not a class. Well,
exactly.
You could argue
it is a class. It is a class because there's all versions of Paris depending on what you want to say. That's not the real Paris.
Okay.
That's not the Paris I know. Whatever.
That's interesting. If you have an entity whose definition varies in time or is disputed are the different variations, instances of a class, or are they stages of an individual? For me, that's not the same thing. But I see what you're saying. You're right that it is a concept encompassing many other concepts. There it's true. I still wouldn't call it a class, but maybe my definition of class is a bit narrower than yours.
Because, yeah, if you take it under my view of what I was saying, I think set theory helps us here. That's why I was saying set theory rather than classes. Is because types. What I would say is that you know, when I say something like, oh, you know, somebody says I hate New York because it's like this, you know, oh, well, that's not the New York I know. That's not my New York, right? And then I would define my New York as located in that place. So I would borrow the set of distinguishing claims for the city itself, and then I would add some more because I'm narrowing the definition of New York to be also a place that, you know, the city that never sleeps and has great music. And I've, you know, so I've added my own understanding of what New York is to create my own definition. And I'll say, oh no, this New York is great. The one under my definition is a fantastic place.
No, but that's really the crux of the essence, right? If you of the issue, and it's a good example. Thank you. If there's a law and the music bars closed in New York, is it still New York? Well, in some ways, yes. In some ways, no.
Right.
Depending on definition.
And according to certain claims, it matters, and other claims it doesn't, right? And
exactly.
And that's how definitions should work.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this evolution, my understanding. Thank you very much for bringing this to me. I have a hard stop in 5 minutes, so I guess I kind of want to put a bow on this, saying now that we've gone through this, getting back to my original point of the difference between ambiguity and general and specific, where I would say my definition of New York is a more specific version of the more general definition of New York. How do I know? I've added more distinguishing claims. And what is an ambiguous definition is one in which I say, you know, New York is fun, and depending on your interpretation of New York, you know, you have half people saying yes, half people saying no. I think the street example is a little easier or a little cleaner example of, you know, this street is in Paris.
But then it's contextual whether you call it ambiguous or.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I don't see the distinction.
No, because you just said that the same definition in one case is ambiguous and in the other, I mean, maybe that's what you're trying to say, but in one it's more specific or general, and in the other it's ambiguous, depending on the argument you're making.
More specific is related to the distinguishing claims, which are not debated.
Right.
Yeah, okay,
and
aren't you just saying
ambiguous,
that aren't you just saying that there might be agreement on the specific cases, and it might be contested whether or not the specific cases are relevant? Because for me, that's the difference between saying, yes, it depends, and no, it doesn't depend. Like for me, it's very relevant to see whether people agree that, yes, there's agreement that it depends. So it is, in that case, you would call general to specific, but it's perfectly possible that you say it doesn't depend. In all of the cases that I think of that are meaningful or whatever, it doesn't depend. Isn't maybe something more like that?
I didn't quite.
I think I understand what you're saying. It's ambiguous when you have reasons to disagree on the definition, but isn't the resolution at that point like picking the more specific claims, and then you might still disagree.
Right.
So it's
Okay. The
act of disagreement what makes it called ambiguous.
Okay.
Right. The case of mammals, right? Where mammals are animals that
produce milk in our viviparous. Yeah, like lactating in viviparous.
Yes. Okay. So there's debate then about whether or not a platypus fits mammals, right? If the only definition is it lactates, then it fits the definition, right? But if you have more then you get to a point where platypus doesn't match. And that is a more specific definition. So you don't have any ambiguity in there. But
well,
if you have a definition of like, where, I guess the problem, mammals isn't a good example.
Why is it ambiguity? Wait. Why is it ambiguity if the only definition is lactates? Then there's no ambiguity.
No, there's no ambiguity.
Definition.
That's why it was a bad example. It was
Okay.
a bad example. Yeah. That ended up being general to specific. I'm trying to think of, feminism,
okay,
something about feminism.
one second.
Like so. Yeah.
If I say New York is great and there's ambiguity whether I mean New York the city or New York the state, is that what you mean by ambiguity, or I think you mean something different? But I want to check that.
I do mean that. I guess Paris.
I would call it a homonym case, to be honest.
That's the homonym case for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's a homonym case. That's a homonym case. A homonym is a kind of ambiguity.
Yeah, but I think you have ambiguity that is not homonym, and that's what we're trying to define. Still don't get it, but I want to
that's the general to specific case, which we have a lot of agreement on. And I think even you guys convinced me, because I was always arguing, oh, the homonym case is the same, why not treat it the same? But I think it makes sense to distinguish that case, because yes, it is different.
Yeah.
I don't see this third ambiguity case.
I think Tim is speaking about a third case, but I still don't get it.
No, I think I may have argued myself out of my case, because I think ambiguity comes from people not understanding the definition, right? Because the example I was giving about Paris, for example, people say, oh, that street's in Paris or not in Paris. Either there's no definition for Paris, or the definition is Paris is a city in France at this location. And then, well, no, that is ambiguous, because
it encompasses definitions that do include or do exclude that street. That's
Paris without any definition is both a homonym and general. It's everything, right?
It's what I call a nuance. It's the concept that encompasses both definition within and without the street is a meaningful concept. People may refer to it without thinking about the distinction.
So nuance is what we call general to specific.
Yeah.
I guess.
And I think the whole trick in argument mapping is finding the right nuance for the argument you're trying to make.
Yep.
What have I done?
And by the way, adding distinguishing characteristics calls the kind of lattice that we do in feature analysis, but that was another story. I keep coming back to feature analysis because it's brilliant.
Okay, let me just get this in the recording or whatever, that I think the ambiguity comes from in the Paris is a city, it matches, if the definition of Paris is a city in France, right, at this location, and you have a street that's like on the periphery, there's nothing in the definition of Paris that includes its size geographically. Its extent. And so there's a missing distinguishing claim that makes people, because of that, debate whether or not that street should be included.
So there's
and that to me is ambiguity.
Yes.
Isn't that
That's
nuance?
what I call nuance.
Yeah.
That's what
you can make it more specific if you need to distinguish, but in the general case, you don't have to.
No, but this is exactly what I call nuance.
Okay, but like
but
in the
you
case of
you call ambiguity, it sounds like what you call ambiguity is when more nuance is needed. That seems to be what you call ambiguity.
I think I also have a hard stop, so.
Okay, I gotta go. I'll think through that. The good points made here. I have to think through it some more and see.
Let's add it to the glossary at some point, because I think we've done a lot of work on these definitions so far.
Yeah.
Talk to you next week.
Talk to you
next week.
Bye,
guys. Thanks. You too.
Bye.